Hiya! Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I am always here to guide and care for travellers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Welcome, my friend! Come in, come in. My, you look as if you've been through it this week. Where, you say? Oh, my dear, let me get you something to eat and drink. I've been there once or twice. The multiverse is filled with many trials and tribulations, and that's the thing about being travelers, adventurers such as ourselves. We live many, many lives, and not all of them are easy. Perhaps a slightly lighter adventure next portal, Take as long as you need to rest before continuing your journey, friend. Today, we continue reading the series of short stories by HP Lovecraft. This week's tale is The Hound. It was written in 1922 and first published in the February 1924 issue of Weird Tales. Let us begin. In my tortured ear there sounds unceasingly a nightmare whirring and flapping, a faint distant baying of some gigantic hound. It is not a dream. It is not, I fear, even madness. For too much has already happened to give me these merciful doubts. St. John is a mangled corpse. I alone know why, and such is my knowledge that I am about to blow out my brains for fear I shall be mangled in the same way. Down unlit and illimitable corridors of eldritch fantasy sweeps the black, shapeless nemesis that drives me to self-annihilation. May heaven forgive the folly and morbidity which led us both to so monstrous a fate. Wearied with the commonplace of a Prozac world, where even the joys of romance and adventure soon grow stale, St. John and I had followed enthusiastically every aesthetic and intellectual movement which promised to respite us from our devastating innuendo. The enigmas of the symbolists and the ecstasies of the pre-Raphaelites all were ours in their time, but each new mood was drained too soon of its diverting novelty and appeal. Only the sombre philosophy of the decadents could hold us, and this we found potent only by increasing gradually the depth and diabolicism of our penetrations. Baudelaire and Humans were soon exhausted of thrills, till finally there remained for us only the more direct stimuli of unnatural personal experiences and adventures. It was this frightful emotional need which led us eventually to the detestable course, of which even my present fear I mention with shame and timidity, that hideous extremity of human outrage, that abhorred practice of grave robbing. I cannot reveal the details of our shocking expeditions or catalogue even partly the worst of the trophies adorning the nameless museum we prepared in the great stone house where we jointly dwelt, alone and servantless. Our museum was a blasphemous, unthinkable place, where, with the satanic taste of neurotic versuli, we had assembled a universe of terror and decay, and to excite our jaded sensibilities. It was a secret room far, far underground, where a huge winged daemon cavern of basalt and onyx vomited a wide grinning mouth, weird green and orange light, and hidden fumatic pipes ruffled into kaleidoscopic dances of death, the lines of the red charnel things hand in hand woven in voluminous black hangings. Through these pipes came at will the odours of our moods most craved, sometimes the scent of pale funeral lilies, sometimes the narcotic incense of imagined eastern shrines of the kingly dead, and sometimes, how I shudder to recall it, the frightful soul-upheaving stenches of the uncovered grave. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely, lifelike bodies perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermy's art, with headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes and heads preserved in various stages of dissolution. There one might find the rotting bald pates of famous noblemen, and the fresh and radiantly golden heads of new-buried children. Statues and paintings there were of all fiendish subjects, and some executed by St. John and myself. A locked portfolio bound in tanned human skin held certain unknown and unnameable drawings which were rumoured Goya had perpetrated but dared not acknowledge. There were nauseous musical instruments, stringed brass and woodwind, on which St. John and I sometimes produced dissonance of exquisite morbidity, whilst in a multitude of inlaid ebony cabinets reposed the most incredible and unimaginable variety of tomb loot ever assembled by human madness and perversity. It is of this loot in particular I must not speak. Thank God I had the courage to destroy it long before I thought of destroying myself. The predatory excursions on which we collected our unmentionable treasures were always artistically memorable events. We were no vulgar ghouls, but worked only under certain conditions of mood, landscape, environment, weather, season, and moonlight. These pastimes, to us, were the most exquisite form of aesthetic expression, and we gave their details in fastidious technical care. An inappropriate hour, a jarring light effect, or a clumsy manipulation of the damp sod would almost destroy for us that ecstatic titillation which followed the exhuming of some ominous grinning secret of the earth. Our quest for novel scenes and conditions was feverish and insolate. St. John was always the leader, and he it was who led the way to that last mocking and accursed spot which brought us to our hideous and inevitable doom. By what malignant fatality were we lured to that terrible Holland churchyard? I think it was the dark rumour and the legendary tales of one buried for 5 centuries, who had himself been a ghoul in his time, and had stolen a potent thing from a mighty slepter. I can recall the scene of these final moments in the pale autumn moon over the graves, casting long, horrible shadows, the grotesque trees drooping suddenly to meet the neglected grass and the crumbling slabs, the vast region of strange colossal bats that flew against the moon, the antique ivied church pointing a huge spectral finger at the livid sky, the phosphorescent insects that danced like death fires under the yews in the distant corner, the odorous of mold, vegetation, and less explicable things that mingled feebly with the night wind from over far swamps and seas, and worst of all, the faint deep-toned baying of some gigantic hound which we could neither see nor definitely place. As we heard this suggestion of baying, we shuddered, remembering the tales of peasantry, for who he had sought for centuries had been found in this self-same spot, torn and mangled by the claws and teeth of some unspeakable beast. I remembered how we delved in this ghoul's grave with our spades, and how we thrilled at the picture of ourselves, the grave, the pale, watching moon, the horrible shadows, the grotesque trees, the gigantic bats, the antique church, the dancing death flies, the sickening odors, the gently moaning night wind, the strange half-heard directionless baying of whose objective existence we could scarcely be sure. Then we struck the substance harder than damp mould, and beheld the rotting oblong box crusted with mineral deposits from long undisturbed ground. It was incredibly tough and thick, but so old that when we finally pried it open and feasted our eyes on what it held, much, amazingly much, was left of the object despite the lapse of 500 years. The skeleton, though crushed in places by the jaws of the thing that had killed it, held together with surprising firmness, and we gloated over the clean white skull and its long firm teeth, and its eyeless sockets that once had glowed with a charnel fever like our own. In the coffin lay an amulet of curious and exotic design, which had apparently been worn around the sleeper's neck. It was the oddly conventionalized figure of a crouching winged hound or a sphinx with a semi-canine face, and was exquisitely carved with antique oriental fashion from a small piece of green jade. The expression on its features was repellent in the extreme, savoring at once death, bestiality, and malevolence. Around the base was an inscription in characters which neither St. John nor I could identify. On the bottom, like a marker's seal, was the graven, grotesque, and formidable skull. Immediately upon beholding this amulet, we knew we must possess it, that this treasure was a lone, logical pelf of centuried grave. Even had its outline been unfamiliar, we would have desired it. But as we looked more closely, we saw that it was not wholly unfamiliar. Alien it indeed was to all art and literature which sane and balanced readers know, but we recognized it as the thing hinted in the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Abdul Arazad, the ghastly sole symbol of the corpse-eating cult of inaccessible Lang in Central Asia. All too well did we trace the sinister lineaments described by the old demonologist. Lineaments, he wrote, drawn from some obscure supernatural manifestation of the souls who vexed and gnawed at the dead. Seizing the green jade object, we gave last glance at the bleached and cavern-eyed face of its owner, and close up the grave as we found it. We hastened from that abhorrent spot, the stolen amulet in St. John's pocket. We thought we saw bats descend in a body to the earths who we lately rifled, as if seeking some curse and unholy nourishment. But the autumn moon shone weak and pale, so we could not be sure. So too, as we sailed next day away from Holland to our home, we thought we heard the faint distant baying of some gigantic hound in the background. But the autumn wind moaned sad and wan, and we could not be sure. Less than a week after our return to England, strange things began to happen. We lived as recluses, devoid of friends, alone, and without servants, in a few rooms of an ancient manor house on a bleak and unfrequented moor, so that our doors were seldom disturbed by the knock of the visitor. Now, however, we were troubled by what seemed to be frequent fumblings in the night, not only around the doors, but around the windows also, upper as well as lower. We once fancied that a large opaque body darkened the library window when the moon was shining against it, and another time we thought we heard a whirring or flapping sound not far off. On each occasion, investigation revealed nothing, and we began to ascribe the occurrences as imagination alone. That same curiously disturbed imagination which still prolonged in our ears the faint baying we thought we heard in Holland's churchyard. The jade amulet now reposed in a niche in our museum, and sometimes we burned strangely scented candles before it. We read much in Necronomicon about its properties and about the relation of ghouls' souls to the objects it symbolized, and we were disturbed by what we read. Then terror came. On the night of September 24, I heard a knocking at my chamber door. Fancying it St. John's, I bade the knocker enter, but was answered only by a shrill laugh. There was no one in the corridor. When I aroused St. John from his sleep, he professed entire ignorance of the event, and became as worried as I. It was that night the faint, distant baying over the moor became to us certain and now dreaded reality. 4 days later, whilst we were both in the hidden museum, there came a low, cautious scratching at the single door which led to the secret library staircase. Our alarm was now divided, for best our fear of the unknown. We had always entertained a dread that our grisly collection might be discovered. Extinguishing all lights, we proceeded to the door and threw it suddenly open, whereupon we felt an uncountable rush of air and heard, as if receding far away, a queer combination of rustling, tittering, and articulate chatter. Whether we were mad, dreaming, or in our senses, we did not try to determine. We only realized the blackest of apprehensions that the apparently disembodied chatter was beyond a doubt in the Dutch language. After that, we lived in growing horror and fascination. Mostly we held to the theory that we were jointly going mad from our life of unnatural excitements, but sometimes it pleased us more to dramatize ourselves as the victims of some creeping and appalling doom. Bizarre manifestations were now too frequent to count. Our lonely house was seemingly alive with the presence of some malignant being whose nature we could not guess, and every night that demonic baying rolled over the windswept moor, always louder and louder. On October 29th, we were found in the soft earth underneath the library window a series of footprints utterly impossible to describe. They were as baffling as the hordes of great bats which suddenly haunted the old manor house in an unprecedented and increasing number. The horror reached a culmination on November 18, when St. John, walking home after dark from a distant railway station, was seized by some frightful carnivorous thing and torn to ribbons. His screams had reached the house, and I had hastened to the terrible scene in time to hear the whir of wings and see a vague, black, cloudy thing silhouetted against the rising moon. My friend was dying, and when I spoke to him, he could not answer coherently. All he could do was whisper, "The amulet, that damned thing," and then he collapsed in an inherent mass of mangled flesh. I buried him the next midnight in one of our neglected gardens, and mumbled over his body one of the devilish rituals he had loved in life. And as I pronounced the last demonic sentence, I heard afar the moor the faint baying of some gigantic hound. The moon was up, but I dared not look at it, and when I saw on the dim litten moor a wide nebulous shadow sweeping from mound to mound, I shut my eyes and threw my face down upon the ground. When I arose trembling, I know not how much later, I staggered into the house and made the shocking obeisance for the enshrined amulet of green jade. Being now afraid to live alone in the ancient house on the moor, I departed the following day for London, taking with me the amulet after destroying by fire and the burial of rest of the imperious collection in the museum. But after 3 nights I heard the baying again, and before a week was over felt strange eyes upon me whenever it was dark. One evening, as I strolled on Victoria Embankment for some needed air, I saw a black shape obscure one of the reflections of the lamps in the water. A wind stronger than the night wind rushed by, and I knew what had befallen St. John must soon befall me. The next day I carefully wrapped the green jade amulet and sailed for Holland. What mercy I might gain by returning this thing to its silent sleeping owner I knew not. But I felt that I must at least try any step conceivably logical. What the hound was, or why it pursued me, were questions still vague. But I had heard the baying first in that ancient churchyard, and every subsequent event, including St. John's dying whisper, had served to connect the curse with the stealing of the amulet. Accordingly, I sank into the nethermost abysses of despair when in an inn in Rotterdam I discovered that thieves had despoiled me of the sole means of salvation. The baying was loud that evening, and in the morning I read the nameless deed of the vilest quarter of the city. The rabble were in terror, for upon an evil tenement had fallen a red death beyond the foulest previous crime of the neighborhood. In squalid thieves' den, an entire family had been torn to shreds by an unknown thing which left no trace, and those around had heard all night above the usual clamor of drunken voices a faint, deep, insistent note of a gigantic hound. So at last I stood again in that unwholesome churchyard, where the pale winter moon cast hideous shadows, and leafless trees drooped sullenly to meet the withered, frosty grass and cracking slabs, and the ivied church pointed a jeering finger at the unfriendly sky, and the night wind howled manically from over the frozen swamps and frigid seas. The baying was very faint now, and it ceased altogether as I approached the ancient grave I had once violated, and frightened away an abnormally large horde of bats, which had been hovering curiously around it. I know not why I went thither, unless to pray, or gibber out insane pleas and apologies to calm the white thing that lay within. But whatever my reason, I attacked the half-frozen sod with a desperation partly mine and partly that of a dominating will outside of myself. Excavation was much easier than I had expected, though at one point I encountered a queer interruption, when a lean vulture darted down out of the cold sky and pecked frantically at the grave earth until I killed him with a blow of my spade. Finally, I reached the rotting oblong box and removed the damp, nitrous cover. This is the last rational act I ever performed. For crouched within that centuried coffin, embraced by a close-packed nightmare, ratoon of huge, sinewy, sleeping bats, was the bony thing my friend and I had robbed, not clean and placid as we had seen then, but covered with caked blood and shreds of alien flesh and hair, and leering sentient at me with phosphorescent sockets and sharp fangs yawning twisted mockery of my inevitable doom. And when it gave from those grinning jaws a deep sardonic bay as some gigantic hound, and I saw it held in its gory, filthy claw the lost and fateful amulet of green jade, I merely screamed and ran away idiotically. My screams soon dissolved into peals of hysterical laughter. Madness rides the star wind. Claws and teeth sharpened on centuries of corpses, dripping death astride a bannacle of bats from night-black ruins of temples buried deep in ballet. Now, as the baying of that dead, fleshless monstrosity grows louder and louder, and the stealthy whirring of those flapping accursed webbed wings circles closer and closer, I shall seek with my revolver the oblivion of which is my only refuge from an unnamed and unnameable.
That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week and we will continue with another short story by HP Lovecraft. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you. Whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden, please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse has some interesting options this week. To the north, hello, do you like cats? Well, that's fantastic, because ours are everywhere and we need them organized. Careful with the little ones, they are so sweet. Make sure they're neat in their new homes. To the west, fancy becoming a barista where your clientele aren't always human? Good. Dust off your coffee mugs and get to it. Connect with customers and make lifelong friends. To the east, welcome to our beautiful tropical island. Why is it on fire? People screaming? Oh, the dead have come back to life through some kind of wacky virus. Lucky you're immune. You're probably the only one that can fix this. Now, you want a baseball bat or a machete? And if you're making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.